Rachel, why should we listen to this podcast today?
You should listen to this podcast because PE affects everybody's lives, and it's important to understand who's playing the parts in the things that affect our lives, from daycare to elder care, dentists to vets, clothing stores. PE affects all of us. And not only that, our pension money is heavily invested into it. So it's just really important that we know and are aware of what's going on in our economy. Also, just clarify that not all private equity is bad. PE, or private equity, sometimes referred to it as PE, is really just an industry where people are investing their money in private companies. But not all PE is bad. Some PE invests for growth. Some PE brings bankrupt companies back from the dead. These are great things. But the largest segment of PE, buyout PE, heavily relies on debt and extraction to remove value from companies as opposed to investing for growth.
Hi, and welcome to Serenity Now, a place for entrepreneurs to ask questions, learn, get connected, and be inspired. Join us as we talk about all things business and the search for the ever-elusive Serenity Now in both business and personal life.
Welcome to another episode of Serenity Now for entrepreneurs, where we talk all things business, how to start, build, grow, and exit businesses. Today's focus is going to be on private equity firms. What are these? Does everyone know? And how is it different maybe from the stock market? How does it impact you? Does it impact you? Well, it's interesting. You may not be aware of it, but it certainly does, whether you're running a small business, thinking of selling one, a consumer buying coffee, or if you pay into our Canadian pension fund. PE is in your life. PE, or private equity, is in your life. So welcome again to our listeners. My name is Rita Kim, and I'll be your co-host for this episode. And let me introduce you to my other beautiful co-hosts here, Serenity Sisters. Peggy, welcome.
Hi, thanks, Rita.
Hey. And Candace, welcome.
Hi, Rita.
Hey. Pretty stoked to introduce you to our guest. I don't know if we're going to get in trouble today or a bunch of stuff is going to happen. I think it'll be good all in the end, but welcome to Rachel Wasserman. Welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me, ladies. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm going to actually toss it right back to you. If you can give us a brief intro about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. So a bit of a jack of all trades. Started my career in marketing at two big CPG giants in business-to-business marketing and sales. Decided I needed a bit of a change, a bit more of an intellectual challenge, and much to my parents' approval, went to law school and became a lawyer and worked in mergers and acquisitions, corporate finance, securities, general corporate commercial law. And I did that for about 8 years. Then I got into investment banking. So actually sell-side financial advisories for people who wanted to sell their businesses, didn't know how. And we would prepare their businesses for sale, find buyers, negotiate the price, and then pass it over to the lawyers to get the deal done. So kind of a nice mix of what I was doing before as a lawyer, but then more of a business and finance angle. After about a decade on Bay Street, I really did some personal reflection as to what I wanted to do with my life. I had a nice little career break that I took to afford me that time. And in that time, I realized, how our economy really works and how I was contributing to it. And so the discourse right now is, where economy's struggling. And I had the fortune of working in blue chip institutions and working with blue chip institutions throughout my career. And I realized that the clients that I was working with were not investing in our economy, which is the driver of growth for our economy. And so I started doing some writing for some think tanks, Social Capital Partners and the Canadian Anti-Monopoly Project, where I laid out the dangers of private equity, buyout private equity and their business model and the harms on our economy and how we can fix it. And so now I've pivoted into fixing some of the problems that I helped create. And then also to radical education, informing people about a large part of our economy that is frankly completely opaque to people who don't participate in it.
So, Rachel, I asked you for a quick intro. Obviously, she didn't listen, listeners. I feel like this probably will continue for the rest of the episode.
Very passionate. That's a good.
Yeah. But please stay tuned because I think there's going to be some good learning here. Let me back it up several steps and let's start with private equity. Let's lay this foundation down and tell us the definition. What does private equity mean? Because I think sometimes we toss names or acronyms out and we don't really have an understanding. So let's start with that.
So private equity, frankly, has lots of different definitions, and depending who you talk to, they could have a different definition than I have. So how I define private equity for the purposes of educating general people who don't work in the industry is that it's kind of like the stock market, but private. So people investing in companies with their money, but without a middleman to organize everything like the stock market. So people are investing their money into funds, and then those funds go out and buy private companies or even public companies and delist them and hold them privately. And so really the difference between a public company and a private company is being listed on the stock market, and the rules and regulations required to be listed on the stock market don't apply to these companies.
So it's a bit of a wild, wild west.
It is very much a wild, wild west. Today, actually, I made LinkedIn news for sharing that the Department of Justice is cracking down on KKR, which is one of the largest private equity firms in the world, for withholding information, failing to file on their antitrust. They didn't file their antitrust forms properly, withheld information, and in some cases just didn't even make proper filings.
So is there any oversight at all? I mean, other than having to file tax returns and follow regular law and stuff like that? Is there any sort of regulations at all?
So there are no laws that govern the business model of private equity. There are laws that govern it as a security. So investment fund laws, investment advisors, and then obviously all the laws that apply to the companies that they own and operate. So if you buy a machine shop, all the health and safety laws that would apply to a machine shop obviously apply to them. But their business model of extraction by using debt to encumber cash flow to extract value back into the hands of shareholders has no limitations.
So why do I care about that? Like, what impact does that have on me, the average consumer? Why do I care?
So the average Canadian is widely impacted by private equity, but you don't know it because it's a level of ownership that sits above the business level. So you probably don't know that Subway Sandwiches is owned by private equity. Pet Value is owned by private equity. The chain Massage Addict, many of your dentists are owned by private equity, and you have no idea.
The accounting firms in Canada, I understand. I hear about this all the time. So
the accounting firms is one that is very concerning to me. It's an opinion that I'm very open about. We cannot let the inmates run the asylum. By conflating these two business models, it really jeopardizes the integrity of the entire profession. The regulators have said there will be pressure to perform and compromise. And so at the end of the day, if you're employed by a private equity-owned accounting firm and they ask you to do something you don't agree with, it is your professional license on the line. They might get in trouble too, but you as a professional will also get in trouble.
Wouldn't that kind of self-regulate though? Because as a professional like Candace, would you put your credentials on the line to do something you were asked to do if it goes against the values and the restrictions imposed upon you by the CPAs?
I wouldn't, but I'm a particularly strong individual. I know plenty of CPAs that are not strong individuals.
And also because you've been around the block too, Candace, without saying any other words. But, when you're newer and your firm gets acquired, you're just going to do as you're told.
Really is clear about what's correct and what's not correct.
Right, because you just haven't,
haven't
been around the
But
block.
don't you spend 4 years in school or 8 years?
Oh, come on. That's theory. That's
on.
theory. Jeez.
Economic freedom also plays a huge part in this. If you are an employee and you don't have a lot of money in the bank and you're dependent on your wages and your employer puts you in a precarious position And accounting firms are dominated. Let's say it's a hypothetical situation where the accounting firms are largely dominated by PE firms, which will be the future if we don't intervene. You're not going to have much choice. And really, it puts the pressure on the individual. There was research that I was presented in a paper at a conference I attended at Oxford University that showed financial advisors, when they were acquired by private equity firms, malpractice did go up. Now, the private equity firms targeted investment advisors that had below average regulatory infractions. And once they took over, those regulatory infractions were on par with everybody else. So effectively, they arbitraged the regulatory infractions.
So I have a question. I want to step back a bit. You're talking about groups being purchased by private equity. You talk about dentists. So is what I'm hearing that private equities are looking at industries and going and picking off several companies within an industry and forming a large group of common type of businesses. And that's what we're seeing. And that's the solution, or it may have seemed like the solution to people to sell when there isn't a lot of buyers for businesses now. Is that what I'm getting?
Yeah, exactly. So Dental Corp of Canada is a great example of a company that has just rolled out that playbook of taking dental practices, bundling them together, corporatizing them, harmonizing the expenses with the broad revenue base, and turning what was a profitable entrepreneurial endeavor for dentists into a corporate chain. And so there's more than just what's on its face in terms of implications.
So where are we seeing that? Are there lots of industries then?
Oh, yeah. I can
About accounting firms. Yeah, let's know some of them. We need to know about those.
Dentists, vets, accounting firms, funeral homes, trades, daycares, retirement homes,
Senior facilities. I've seen it. Senior
dental labs, any profession that will allow this to happen. It will happen.
So that's why the concern.
Exactly. And then also, too, there was a study done in Arizona. I believe it was about vets. And they did research to see when a vet got bought out by private equity, would they change their banner? Would they communicate to the customer that they had changed control? And the research showed that the majority of them did not, that the branding stayed the same. And really, it's just a behind the scenes capitalization change where the owners have changed hands. They've layered up the company with debt. But you as a client, how will you know? You're going to probably know by different sales tactics.
Yeah, but that's typically how things work anyways. If I'm going to buy the shares of a business, typically you wouldn't know that the ownership is changed. And you don't kind of sometimes want to have people know the ownership is changed. That's part of normal process because you don't want to impact stuff. So I think part of what you're talking about is saying, hey, there's this stuff happening behind the scenes. And because I'm not looking behind the scenes, because I'm just going to my vet, for example, will you just continue with that example? And I'm going to the vet because that's who I've been with forever. And they've always taken care of me and taken care of Teddy and Daisy and Boo. Those are actually our animals. And so what would be different for me? And how would this impact me? Because I just want to break it down a little further.
For sure. So you're going to see it in terms of, oh, Teddy should get this blood test done. And the vet's going to recommend it to you. And maybe Teddy doesn't need it.
But how do I know as a regular consumer? I kind of trust that, don't I?
You don't. You don't know that. The best examples, frankly, that I can give you are actually in long-term care homes. That's where the statistics are the most alarming. And frankly, these are very vulnerable people.
I'm almost scared to hear this.
So at a private equity home, pre-COVID, you had a increased mortality rate of approximately 10%, increased costs of approximately 10%. And then the stat that makes my stomach drop is a 50% increased likelihood of sedation. And so why are they sedating these patients? Presumably to keep labor costs down.
Holy crap.
Jeez. So 10% increase in mortality, 10% increase in the cost of putting my family member in this place, and a 50% increase in sedation. Again, just same as the vet, I would trust that, oh, well, you're with my loved one and I don't know what is needed, but you think this is needed.
And here, I'm going to take it one step further.
Oh, gosh, I'm already trying to process this, Rachel. Give me a second.
Let's say there was a mishap and you want to sue. Well, what they've done are these sale leaseback transactions where they sell the underlying real estate out from the business and then encumber it with rent payments going forward, which you might not understand what the implications of that are. Obviously, that's going to encumber cash flow going forward. The business has less money. But if you want to sue them, they have
blood from a stone.
Yeah, blood from a stone.
You can't get blood from a stone. There's no assets.
Yeah.
Actually, one of Canada's pension plans, PSP, was invested in this business model, and they got so much shame for it, they had to separate, and now they just own the real estate, and they allow an operator to run the business. But Canadians don't know how their pension funds are being invested. Some of our investments actually are hurting us. I don't know if you heard about this rent strike going on in Ontario with tenants who don't want to pay their rent because the landlords aren't maintaining the facilities and the rents are going up too much.
Yeah, I recall something about last year about our pension fund sold some sort of tower. I think it was in New York for $1. We liquidated. Did you guys hear about that?
No.
Okay, I'll fire that over to you guys. We'll put it in the links as well. But basically, that was insane. A New York City tower for $1. That's when I started paying attention to the pension funds.
So because this isn't a podcast for entrepreneurs, I think the important point is to explain how they run their business from a operations finance perspective and how that differs from how an entrepreneur would run their business. So when an entrepreneur runs their business, it's theirs. And if, let's say in this example, you have a good, healthy business and you can dividend yourself, let's say $500,000 a year. Well, if your business has some problems and you have a bad year, a prudent business owner would say, okay, I'm only going to dividend out $250,000 this year. The business I can't take this much out of the business.
Correct. You got to reinvest into staff, into not capital expenditures, or wherever it is that the business is hurting, marketing, etc. Right? So
Been there, done that.
yeah, software, AI, and everything else. Yeah.
But when you're a private equity firm, you're accountable to your client. Your clients are the investor. And so you have to get the sexiest return you can possible. And your business model is predicated on returning that capital. So if you have a bad year, you still have to return that capital. And so instead of taking out less of a dividend, you're actually going to hurt the business. You're going to have to do layoffs. You're going to have to cut expenses that maybe you don't need to, because the owner-operator entrepreneurial way of running a business is putting the business first. The private equity way of running a business is putting the shareholders first. So it is not about the health of the business. It is about extracting the value that you need to extract and returns to meet the commitments to your investors. And if that means bankrupting the company to do so, because that's the best returns you're going to get, like Red Lobster, that's what they're going to do. Most people think all you can eat shrimp bankrupted Red Lobster. No, it was private equity.
Interesting.
So what does this look like down the road then if we just keep going like this? What happens?
Yeah, which, where we've got what we call the succession tsunami. We've got business owners that have been around for a while, had to go through the heartache and some tough years in COVID. And, whether it's family, health concerns or other issues, it's time to go. It's time to say, I've got to sell the business with not much out there to buy the business. Somebody gets approached by a PE firm. Why is it so bad? I mean, I guess, do you blame them?
I don't blame them. They're the only buyers out there, really. Obviously, there's going to be like vertical and horizontal potential buyers to integrate your business competitors. But the main buyers are private equity. And so if you're selling your business and that's all that's out there, I don't blame you for selling it. You worked very hard for this business. But what a lot of people don't know is what it's like to do a deal with PE, because they're going to tell you everything you want to hear until the deal is done.
Sounds like a nightmare.
They make their money on a buyout private equity firm that uses a leveraged buyout. So lots of debt to buy your business. The business itself actually takes out the debt. So they're buying these businesses for about 10 to 20% of their value. And then the target business takes out a loan and pays the difference.
So give an example just break that down into a quick example so that, it's
I'll give a very easy example. So I want to buy a business. I'm going to use very easy round numbers.
Use Peggy's number. Yeah, Peggy's company. You're going to buy Peggy's company.
Peggy's company is so valuable for the $100 million.
Ooh, sweet.
I only have to put down $10 million of my investors' money. The balance, I get a bank to work with me, 10 to 20, depending on the bank. I get the bank to work with me and Peggy to get Peggy's company to do all the loan paperwork, that at the closing time, the way it actually works is Peggy sells me the company, and then immediately I send her a wire, 10 million from my bank account and 90 million from her own company.
And
And then that company has the burden of those debt payments until it's paid off. That is cash flow that could have gone into capital expenditures. It could have gone into wages. It would grow the economy if it was spent, but instead it's returned to shareholders. And where are these shareholders? The shareholders are private equity firms, and their investors are global. So they're not spending this money in Canada either. There are some Canadian investors, but the Canadian pensions are actually doing this exercise outside of Canada, because the Canadian pension plan, believe it or not, is the second largest private equity investor in the world.
Yeah.
They're the second largest institutional investor in the world. And they were the first for a significant period of time.
So now we're bringing it back. We're bringing this all back to how does this impact us and our life? And now, as Peggy had asked earlier about if we continue down this path, what does the economy look like if kind of we leave PE unchecked, or some of the PEs and firms that do this, because there's others. There's always another side of the story, and we'll get to that. But if we leave this kind of unchecked or continuing down the path, what does the future look and feel like?
So the business model is consolidation. And so we look at our Competition Act, and our merger review threshold is $93 million. So a lot of this stuff is falling below the radar. The stats I looked at for 2023, I think it was about 85. It's not perfectly 85, but it's around that. 85% of transactions were $100 million or less. And the majority of that, a significant majority of that, I want to say something like 75%, was $50 million. These deals are all flying under the radar of our Competition Bureau. So it's death by 1,000 cuts. If we don't intervene, small businesses across the world, not just the country, not just the province, are going to disappear. A great hypothetical I'd like to pose. Peggy, let's say you have a daughter or a son. Do you have a kid?
I have
Any
3
kids?
Yeah.
So Candace, if any of your kids, professionals, if someone wants to be a vet today, if they wanted to go buy a practice, they have to compete against private equity. I've talked to vets. They cannot compete.
In what respect? In the process, they can't compete? Okay, gotcha.
They cannot compete to buy one today.
They can set up one on their own, but now they're competing against these PE firms that have this group of vets with systems in place and harmonized expenses.
That's today. You can't afford to buy one, and there's consolidation that they can't really compete because they have more economies of scale. They can lower their costs.
Correct, yeah.
But I want you to look now into the future, 10, 15 years, if we don't do anything. If someone wants to be a vet, they are destined to a life of employment. They will have no ability to go out on their own because there will not be any independent vets anymore.
I have a question. Based on what you've described, if they have bad years, the customers are going to suffer. Mm-hmm. So doesn't competition mean that somebody pops up to service that customer that is not getting what they need from this corporation, I guess? Corporate services are uniform, impersonal, like there's all sorts of things. There's lots of reasons why people don't want that kind of service. Mm-hmm. So they go back to the smaller one. And if there's no smaller one, then that creates the room for them to be or exist, does it not?
From a competition standpoint, I don't think there's enough regulatory oversight here, and that's just my opinion. It's coming down to cost right now. I'm actually going to be featured in a documentary on the issue on the Fifth Estate on January 24th.
Wow.
I agree with you that in principle, in a free market, that is what should happen. Mm-hmm. We cannot live in a free market anymore.
Okay.
Those are bold words there, Rachel.
Don't think the PE companies will implode because of their lack of good business acumen. And when I say that, I mean good price points, good service, is all the things that make a business successful.
I would say that there are many businesses in today's economy that don't put their customers first and are wildly financially successful.
Okay, fair enough.
I think that just kind of comes down to what's available, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you just got to take what you can get because that's all that you have is an option.
Do you think it's easier to be poor customer centric in a product business than a service business, though?
You obviously have to be more customer centric in a service business. And I guess the point that is important here is
you don't have to be that much better if you control the whole market.
Because you don't really have competition then, right? I guess that's what we're trying to get to.
Your comparison is a poor standard.
So your competitors are also financialized. They're also private equity firms. So it's the same operating model. So all we're doing is lowering.
Yeah, the bar just got lowered, people. And we've experienced that, you guys. If you go into businesses, you see that people don't know the business. You see that, there is no service in stores, et cetera, et cetera. You've seen it. And it's really noticeable since COVID, I would say.
Well, private equity loves retail. There's a whole bunch of retailers that have gone bankrupt at the hands of private equity. Toys R Us in the US was a big one. Their interest payments, I think, were like 90+% of their cash flow because they had so much debt.
Oh, that's insane. That's just not sustainable. You don't have to be in finance or anything to figure that one out.
Yeah,
Payless Cheese was another one that died at the hands of PE. Red Lobster, thankfully, has reemerged from bankruptcy, but that was also at the hands of PE. It's everywhere. It affects all of our lives. Daycares, even like childcare.
So we basically scared the crap out of everyone. Rachel, come on. You got to give me something on the other side. You got to give me something positive to talk about. So I don't think that life is over now as we know it as an entrepreneur. We are Serenity Now for entrepreneurs, but we're not dead for entrepreneurs yet.
No, not dead.
So
there's so much hope I have.
Great. Share some of that.
The problem with private equity is that it's the only option that has been put forward to people. But there are so many other options. So if you're looking to sell your business, what about an employee ownership trust? What about a management buyout? There are all different ways that you can exit your business without selling to private equity. Employee ownership trusts is a new concept that was just put forward in Canada. It's quite successful in the UK. And the think tank that I work with, Social Capital Partners, we were fundamental in getting that legislation put through. So I am on the front lines of employee ownership trusts.
I think we have, nailed PE to the cross. And I think we have a potential another podcast that can shed some better light on the whole matter. And I'd love to hear about it again. Right now, I think what we should do is a bit of a quick fire to wrap up today's podcast. And so we're going to go around the room and just give a little insights or any takeaways that you have from this. And at the end, perhaps we can hear one more time from you if you have something to add, Rachel. But let's start with Candace. What do you take from this today?
I have to admit, I'm in accounting, so I've heard about the PE takeover of accounting, and I was uneasy about it. But you've articulated why I was uneasy about it. I probably at some level understood all this mechanism of what was going to happen. And I don't know. I hope we can turn the tide and do things a different way. That's for sure. Rita?
This one it just got so many pieces and variables to it. I think step one was being able to have a chance to sit down with someone like Rachel and learn about the basics and share some of the understanding out there of private equity. And it's not just something Wall Street or something for others. It's here. It's in our home. It gets here in our homes right now when we're trying to take care of our family members, our animals. And when we talk about the Canadian Pension Fund, this is not something that we don't want to kind of keep our heads in the sand about. We need to all start talking about this. What the solutions are, that I don't know, I don't have. And I think that we've got other brilliant people that are working on things, but I think awareness was my biggest piece that came about today. So thank you. Thank you for that, Rachel.
I do think that the awareness is really important. I saw what was happening. I never put two and two together, though. I saw it as a way out for small business owners because clearly there is a very difficult time to sell business. And I've sold a business and it's not fun. And I can't imagine dealing with private equity buyers would be fun at all. I love that you have suggested some other ways. And I would really love to see you come back on our podcast and talk about the trust. I think that's something that people should investigate. I've heard about it. I'm glad to hear it's in Canada, and thank you for your work and bringing it.
Rachel, was there any last thing you wanted to share or forgot to mention or were dying to mention? You've scared us enough, I think, personally, but maybe there's something else here.
I think the most important piece I'd like to leave everyone is just that who owns our companies, who owns our economic engines matters for our country, for our economy. So one question I like to ask when I walk into a business, who owns this? You know, when I took my dog, frankly, to the emergency room, unfortunate circumstances, we had to put him down. And the first thing I said is, who owns this clinic? Knowing who owns the businesses you patronize will shock you sometimes. People don't know that Value Village is controlled by a private equity firm. And so it's really important that we do our diligence to know who owns the businesses that we are patronizing.
Yeah, I'm going to take it to that other final step is also know who you're trying to sell your business to as well. I will also say that, guys, not all PE firms are negative and they're bad or evil villains. There are others out there, and maybe we can talk about that as well in another episode. So today was kind of a bit of an eye-opener, I think, for all of us. Some good awareness and understanding of private equity, how it impacts all of us, whether we were aware of it or not, you know, from buying your coffee, going to your gym, looking at the businesses you frequent, and even just looking at your pension. So thank you so much. I'd love to say thanks again to our guest, Rachel Wasserman, and we can get up links and emails and connection details if people want to get a hold of you, right, Rachel?
Absolutely.
Perfect. And thanks to my co-hosts, the brilliant yet also beautiful Peggy and Candace. Thanks, guys, and myself, Rita Kim. We hope that you've learned a few things in this episode, and please share it with some entrepreneurs you know. Not sure if it's going to give a whole lot of serenity now out there, but hey, with knowledge comes empowerment and decision making, and so that's where we're hoping the serenity will come in. Thanks so much again, everyone, for listening, and we hope to see you next time.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and picked up some good tips and best practices that would benefit your entrepreneurial journey. Remember, none of the content in this podcast should be relied upon as standard legal or business advice. Always consult a professional for your specific business. You may know someone who could benefit from this podcast. Please share it with your business community, and perhaps it can give an entrepreneur you know some serenity now.